Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. You know, I live in small northwest New Mexico town, and I think it's kind of interesting that there's a lot of interesting people here. And why I'm bringing this up on a 2A podcast is going to be apparent here in a little bit. You know, we always have those little pieces of people, or those little people that are in our sphere that end up either as allies or end up as enemies, and you wonder what the heck's going on. And there's a guy who's, likes to talk a lot of smack. And I found myself recently just being a hell of a lot more calmer, specifically with this person, because he called me, well, in no short order, he called me a bad dad. And I do my best I can to be to be a dad. But I've never saw myself as a bad dad. To me, that's the ultimate insult, and the reason why that is because I had a great father. He wasn't the best. My dad had some shortcomings. One of the things he did was drive a passion to the 2A for me that I've spread to my kids, and this guy is an outright leftist, and he's been known to let his mouth overload his ass, let his mouth write checks his ass can't cash. Well, he went one too far. And I'm not going to name names in any of this in this story, but there's a young lady who's very nice, very sweet. She was driving to work, and for some reason, this man, I won't even call him a man, this boy, pulled a gun on her. Well, she responded in kind with her own gun. Which leads me to the situation we're in today's world. There's how many times have you driven down the road and someone was pissed off at you and you didn't even know they were pissed off at you? How many times have you yourself gotten angry driving on the roads in New Mexico? I don't know what it is about people in New Mexico. They don't seem to know how to drive like if you've ever lived in a larger city. They're always kind of slow. They tend to change lanes without letting you know. And Lord help you if you end up with someone from out of state coming here trying to figure out how they drive, and then you see them acting just as stupidly or poorly. And this is my opinion, of course, because, out-of-state drivers kind of tick me off a lot, especially the ones from Colorado. But you have to think about that they're people trying to figure out where to go. Maybe they're not from this area. If they have an out-of-state plate, that makes a hell of a lot of sense. But these two people are natives to northwest New Mexico. And it's to that point where people don't understand what they're doing. Now, luckily, there were no rounds exchanged here. And I think law enforcement got involved on behalf of the lady. But the point being is that you never know when you're going to have to be able to use a firearm. And in this case, you can say that a firearm being used on her side probably dissuaded or discouraged this person from just brandishing his or actually using his, because he actually was worried about death. And I think that's what we need. I think that an armed society is a polite society, and I've said this on this podcast for as long as it's existed, stay strapped or get clapped. But this little story came out, and what's interesting about it to me is, I could have seen with this particular person, the male, because I won't hit women. I'd rather just take the ass beating when it comes to women. Because that's something my daddy taught me, was if you can't take a hit from a woman, you're not really a man. Even if they're wailing on you, you need to take it. There are other ways to deal with that situation. The best way when it comes to women, just let them have their anger and walk away. Get away from that. And it was making me think about my concealed carry. So one of the things that my concealed carry teacher has always taught me is when to know when to act, when to be a good witness, and when to have the discipline and the fortitude to move forward. And what made me think about that is that since this person has kind of, not kind of, he actually tried to egg on a fight. I think he knew that he was armed and he was on the better side, at least that's what he thought, had it actually went to that. Now, the problem I have with that is that that same CCW teacher that told us that if you're going to fight, don't carry a gun, just scrap it out. I don't try to get into any fights. I'm 45 years old. I've learned a lot of self-discipline, and while I used to be very quick to anger, getting my CCW kind of tempered that anger in a lot of ways. I find myself being more charitable on the road. I find myself being more charitable to people that are just having a bad day and just kind of sidestepping that. And the reason why is when you've trained to that level of violence and you've actually worked at getting to that skill level, and that's where I believe I'm getting, if I'm not already there, is that I have a certain set of skills, and I have trained up enough, and I've spent years learning to train that way, that I really don't want to use that option unless I've given no choice. Now, I know for a fact that if he had brandished a gun, that fight would have already been on, and this story would have been way different. I'm pretty sure he wouldn't have survived had he pulled a gun on me, brandished a gun on me, because brandishing a gun is pretty much all you need in the state of New Mexico to go to the next level. And because you don't know what they're going to do when they do something like that. Brandishing a knife when they're, 30 yards away, that's kind of nothing. If they're inside of that 5-yard range, though, and they brandish a knife, now they're in that closing distance where you need to think really quickly, and you need to let that OODA loop sense of what you're going to do kick in. I don't know the distances that this happened with these two people. I really am just fortunate that the person I actually think is awesome didn't have to take it to that next level. But it brought up some of that thought process in my head, and I've been trying to think about this all weekend of what would I have done in that situation. And the answer is pretty damn obvious. Like I said, had he brandished a gun with me, it probably would have been his death. And I don't mean that in a bad way or like a certain way. I just know that would have flipped that last little switch of threat matrix I have that said it's time to go to work, and I'll deal with the repercussions after that. And it's because I don't believe people, and you can't believe it nowadays, are stable enough to understand what they're doing. If they're willing to pull a gun for some arbitrary reason and not have an intent other than to try to brandish it to scare you or brandish it to push their way of thought on you, then they are in that level of the threat that we want to take care of. And when I talked to this young lady, I asked her what she was carrying, and she said she's carrying a .380, and I carry a .380 sometimes. And I asked her what type of ammunition she used, and she said, well, hollow points. And I was like, well, you need to check out some Lehigh Defense rounds. And then why I say that is Lehigh Defense, I believe, is the best .380 carry round that you can have, especially if you know it'll cycle in your gun all the time, because some guns probably don't have that, especially in the .380, don't have a smooth feed ramp. And this is one of those it's a solid copper bolt projectile with a cross machined into it. And what this does is it allows it to go through ballistic media, whether it's a person or ballistic gel media, and it actually creates a wound channel that is on par with a 9mm or a 45 even, but it also has the penetration effect, and it's using a 90-grain bullet instead of, a heavier 100-grain, or I think it may be even a 55-grain that some of these rounds that they're coming out with this X-type stuff in there to do it. Now, why is that a thing? Well, ballistics gel, or the ballistics that you need to worry about for concealed carry or for defensive rounds, is that it needs to get at least 12 inches of penetration, 18 inches as the best. Anything more than that is over-penetration. And this was found after there was a shooting incident, I believe it was in Florida or California, one of the two, where the FBI had to stop some guys, and they found that the rounds weren't penetrating enough to make effective hits on the person. And this person was using a fully automatic. They were shooting up, spraying and praying. And it got to the point where the FBI actually had to go to a gun store. Now, the FBI went to a gun store to get guns to actually stop the threat. This precipitated them going to the 10 millimeter and then finding out that the 10 millimeter was too much for some of their agents and they had to go to the 40. Now, that's a long history story that probably doesn't matter. And I'm still of the volition that a gun in the hand is one better than one that's in the safe. You know, the gun you have on you, you should be very effective at using. If you can hit them in the vitals, it will stop the threat. And in today's society, anytime someone has came under fire, it usually precipitates the end of the gunfight, meaning that these guys aren't ready to take rounds. It also has to go to the mindset you have to have. You know, you get hit with a gun, with a round, you need to know that this isn't the end of your life, and you need to continue to fight until the threat is over. This is something that my CCW guy, my trainers, I should say, have said and forced that mindset in you consistently. A pistol round is the least effective round for stopping a threat possible. But the reason why you carry a pistol is because you can't carry a full-size rifle on your person. It's just inconvenient. You know, society looks down on that even more than you carrying a pistol. So you have to be very good at what you do. So I'm saying this stuff to let you know, if you're in Northwest New Mexico or even in your daily life and you're listening from across the country, that you need to train. You need to be ready. And I say this because we've seen it too many times, time and time again, where people have done something stupid. And it made me think more about how many people, how many bad situations are actually stopped by someone just having another gun. You know, this guy, maybe he would have done something, maybe he wouldn't have. But the fact that she was able to make parity and be on the same footing with this guy speaks volumes to me. Because that's people finally saying, enough's enough. I have to take care of myself. And when you live in places like I do, this makes a lot of sense, but it's becoming more and more apparent everywhere else in the country that this needs to be something you think about. You know, I go so far as recommending you carry an IFAK. So if you don't know what an IFAK is, it's an individual first aid kit. And why I say that is I'm not so much carrying that I'm going to have to patch the hole in the guy I just put the hole in, but anyone else that may have been hit by a stray bullet. Or maybe I wasn't the intended target and I'm stopping that guy from continuing, or that girl continuing their threat, continuing their reign of terror. I end the terror, I end the problem, but then what's the aftermath? And I've trained on that too, because it concerns me. You know, after the shooting in Aztec, and I bring this up all the time, but after that there was a long thought process of what I could have done to make that situation better, or could I made it worse, or what we need to do as a person, you know, in the 2A community. What do we do to do this? First, it's never the gun's fault. It's those unstable people that are willing to think that tier of violence is necessary for even the most minor problems. You know, we have to change our mindset as a country, and we need to change our mindset as a people in general, that, you know, your pound of flesh doesn't really matter. And, you know, whatever you're thinking of social media-wise, that isn't real life. Real life is that these people just exist and live and do their thing. And there's a lot of people in today's society that don't think like that. They think about that stuff that's in the ether internet as the world, when it's not. You know, I found myself being guilty of that several times. You know, the social war, or the social justice war that we're fighting, the culture war issues that we fight all the time, or at least I do online, aren't the real world scenarios. You know, what just happened to my friend is very, very indicative of what a normal situation would be. And I think she's going to be training up more. She has a great boyfriend. I'm sure he's probably making sure she's tuned up better in her skills, which is what you should do as a man with your lady or your significant other, is you want to make your friends and your family and anyone who's a mentor to the 2A, which I am. I try to be the best advocate I can be for the 2A. That means I go shooting with people, and that means I introduce them to firearms, and that means I teach them what I know, and then I connect them to people that are better at it than what I am. You know, Tough CCW is where I get most of my CCW training. Floyd can teach you how to be a very good shooter, and he can teach you how to do it with a rifle or a pistol or a shotgun or whatever you need to. And he's very good at making sure you're competent with your gun, and whether you know if your gun is a boat anchor or it is a usable piece of equipment or a piece of the tool for the job you're going to use it for. You know, that's the type of scenario that we need to start thinking about, because you see crime going nuts. And I believe firmly in my heart of hearts that an armed society is a polite society. You know, you don't see those huge crime sprees yet in small towns, because there's enough people like me that are trying to train and keep ourselves and our community safe. We need that same mentality throughout the country. And I don't know how else to put it. This may sound rambling, but it's just, think about that. How many times have you had someone just go off? What would have happened if they took it to that next level? Are you ready? You know, that's where I am terrified of if I have to do that. And I'm not terrified. I know I can do it. It's just I really don't want to hurt somebody else. I mean, that should be my last line of defense, the last thing I ever do. But it's something I trained for, because sometimes it rains. You know, even in northwest New Mexico, we get pretty good storms sometimes. When that situation hits, it's not if anymore, it's when. I hope it never gets to that tier where you run into that opponent that has outmatched you so much that you can't match parity and be toe-to-toe. Because, you know, it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. And in today's society, we're at that edge where it's time to be ready. Like, share, subscribe, be great.
In the top, I can't let it slide. My politics are rather controversial. Who would have thought that I ain't catching all slack, and I have enemies on my ball sack? I'm thinking